This episode is brought to you by Fox One. Watch all 104 matches of the FIFA World Cup live in 4K for just $19.99 a month with 3 days free. Build your own multi-view, choose up to 3 streams, and follow player spotlights. Stay on top of every moment with live stats, highlights, and instant replays. The FIFA World Cup, streaming live on Fox One. Offers are subject to change. See fox.com for complete terms and conditions.
If we knew more about our sleep, what would we do differently? Would we go to bed at a consistent time or take steps to reduce interruptions to our sleep? With Sleep Score, Apple Watch measures your bedtime consistency, interruptions, and sleep duration. Then, every morning it combines these factors into an easy-to-understand score from 1 to 100. So you'll know how to take the quality of your sleep from okay to very high. Know your sleep score with Apple Watch. iPhone 11 or later required.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Dr. Psych Mom Show. Today, I'm going to talk about whether you should discuss negative life experiences that you've had with your kids and how to do so, because obviously, to some degree, you know, you have to. Everybody has to do that to a lesser or greater degree, and it's not all bad. And we will talk about that as soon as I tell you to subscribe. My most recent subscriber episode was on agreeableness, which is a personality trait that helps all relationships. It's not being a doormat. And if you've ever been accused of being difficult or disagreeable, that's the episode for you. Okay, so this is coming from a discussion in the Facebook secret group, which you should join. It's the last bastion of non-terrible things on the internet, and it is markedly different from the hellscape of the public Facebook page, where I wake up every morning, I have to delete like 10 people right before I get out of bed. I have to block like 10 people, whoever is negative and nasty, or just, some people get obsessed with negative comments, and they're exactly the people who should listen to the agreeableness episode, but who never will. And I mean, if that's a you thing, if you get sucked into these online discussions, I mean, I should just make a podcast about this, but if you ever added up all the minutes that you spend on this unpaid hobby of getting yourself angry, man, it's like a lot of your life. So it's like an addiction, like anything else, but maybe I'll just do a podcast episode on it. So let's get to this one about, should you discuss negative life experiences with your kids? Yes, you should, but not in a way that's going to make them depressed and anxious and think that life is terrible, right? So if you grew up poor and you didn't know, where your next meal was coming from, or your car kept breaking down, you couldn't get to school on time, you didn't know if you'd be able to go to college, or you had to work starting very young, so you couldn't do a lot of other things. I'm just using this as an example. Then yeah, your kid should know that. You know what I mean? Like, they shouldn't be all the time like some caricature of I had to walk uphill both ways, my life sucked, you should be so grateful. But tell them about you. You would read them a book of somebody who grew up poor, like you would have them watch a movie, and everybody would be rooting for that character to make their life better as an adult. And you have that experience, so why wouldn't you share it? Now, there's a big difference between, and my next episode is going to be on the professional victims, so I'll talk about this more, but there's a big difference between somebody who says, everything was hard for me since I was young, and that's why everything's terrible now. Things are lucky. Other people are lucky, and I'm not. Things go poorly for me. They did since I was a kid. I had no shot. My dad left. My mom was an alcoholic. We were poor. I was hungry, and that's why everything is so, you're such an ingrate because you don't know what you have, and that's why everything is tough for me and not for other people. That is like a terrible rant, and if that sounds like stuff that you've said, I definitely would recommend therapy to try to process and grieve some of the very real trauma that you went through without then having to re-traumatize your children, who then feel guilty for the life that you give them, which is better than that. Because a lot of parents put the kids in an impossible situation. They try to give the kids a better life, but then they guilt trip them constantly and constantly tell the kids that they don't really know what it is to suffer or to struggle. Right? And that puts the kids in an impossible situation because you, first of all, they do, because they're in a situation of a parent who constantly guilt trips them, which, you might have been too, but they share that experience. But also you're protecting them with good intentions from hardship, but then you're looking down on them for not having hardship. So if you put them in that double bind, then they will eventually withdraw from you, because nobody wants to be put into a no-win situation where you're disrespected for not having the very life experience that you protect them from. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is to, well, you can take this too far. There's people who make everything a teachable moment. Don't make everything a teachable moment. You're allowed to share with your kids negative things that have happened in your life and what you've learned without then making yourself into the holy, amazing person who learns and grows constantly and never makes the same mistake twice and is a paragon of, virtue in every way. But it's something in between. You can say, yes, we grew up poor. It was hard. At that point, my mom was drinking a lot. Now she doesn't. She's a good grandmother. There were things, though, as a mother that she was not able to do. And so from that, I learned a couple things. I did learn to be independent. However, also, things were hard for me, and so I wasn't that confident when I was growing up. And I think I've worked through some of that now, but, it's always a little bit in the background, like anything you go through is. And, that's also why I don't drink, for example. I'm just making up this idea of the woman who has, or the man who has an alcoholic, what I just said. This is not any client. I mean, it's like every client, but it's not any specific client. It's a very common experience, though. People grow up with an alcoholic parent, then they don't want to drink. They felt insecure as a kid. They didn't want to invite anybody over, but they also learned how to take care of themselves, because nobody was there to take care of them. Now, that is something age appropriate. By the time your kid is in middle school, people are starting to drink. People are starting to talk about alcohol and drugs and sex. And, you can say things that are relevant to those topics. People think you can, and then they miss the window. And then they have a 16-year-old who's drinking and they don't even know how to bring it up. Or who smells like smoke or pot and they don't really even know how to talk about it because they never did. And it's never too late. You can push yourself to have conversations with your kids that deepen your connection at any time. But honestly, it's easier when you start out at the middle school age at least. Now, elementary schoolers too, they don't have to know all of the drugs, let's say, your parent was using, but you could say, my mother was drunk a lot and she would lay on the couch and I had to make dinner. On the one hand, that was very, very difficult. And I try never to put you in any kind of situation where you feel alone like that. On the other hand, they taught me to be self-sufficient in some way. And if you, by the way, have no positives that you can get, no meaning has been made from the trauma of your childhood, then that too is something that you can explore productively in therapy. Because even the worst situation taught you something. Right? And you would not be the same person without that. And you can grieve that situation and process that anger and see how it shaped you in many ways. And many of those include positive ways and giving you grit and strength and fortitude and self-reliance. So it's not like there is not a full spectrum of outcomes from even the worst situation. As I say overly much, Viktor Frankl wrote Man's Search for Meaning in Auschwitz, right? So he's the classic existential psychology, father of existential psychology. And, he wouldn't have come up with any of that except for this horrible, traumatic, awful experience, right? So therapy is excellent at helping you make meaning out of trauma. And once you have made this meaning and figured out what this past trauma and these negative life experiences did for you, then that can allow you to speak openly to your child in a way where you're not scared to, upset them, and you're not scared that you can't tell them anything, because the worst is to feel like you can't even be yourself with your kids. That happens to a lot of people who had a difficult childhood. They know they don't want to be like their parent, but they don't know who to be like, so that they end up being kind of fake with their kids, all the time. All they talk about is the kid. And I have a podcast about this. It's like being yourself around your kids, a novel idea in today's child-centered society. Something like that I'll try to link in the podcast, suggested episodes. But if you feel like you can't, even be yourself with your kid at all, then what's the point of the relationship? You're not just a facilitator as a parent. You're also a human being. So there are ways to talk about things. And one of the big ones people say is, well, if my parent was so dysfunctional, but now they're a good grandparent, as I alluded to in my earlier example with the mother who was drunk and now, she's a good grandmother, you can say things like that. Like kids especially at like a middle school age, are never gonna say, oh, grandma, I heard you were real drunk. Like, who would say that, And if you think your kid would say that, then say, I'm talking to you at a different level because you're a little older now, and I obviously would hurt grandma for you to say something like that. So I'm just telling you so that you can understand more of my experience. And I'm very grateful that grandma is a great grandma, and she is. Now, if she's not, then the kid already notices that. If grandma still drinks, then the kid would probably not be shocked that she used to drink also. Your stories, unless you make them like so horrible, unless you make them into these tragic retellings, they're not going to harm the relationship that your kid has with your parents. This is a very common question that I get. The kids are smart. They think of that as like some information, but not all information. You're not telling them when they're 2 years old and they look at you like you're God, or when they're 5 years old even. You're telling them when they're an older elementary school or middle school and they can have some ideas in their head. And it's a great time to just underscore the common, like the basic truth that should be taught in your home, which is there are shades of gray. Nobody's perfect. People have good sides and bad sides. Good people do bad things, There's all this nuance that can be profitably discussed, in these situations when you are sharing stuff about yourself that you actually feel deeply about. These are meaningful heart-to-heart conversations that children remember, but don't have them all the time. It's not like every Sunday is the day that you wax rhapsodic about your alcoholic mother. Like, no, that's every so often. Or if it comes up, if it's on your mind. And now if it's on your mind every Sunday and every day, well, then, as I just said, you want to get into therapy and work through some of that so that you can kind of incorporate it into the narrative of your life rather than keeping it as this trauma memory that keeps coming up, because that's what trauma-focused therapy does, right? Is it helps you, and I've talked about this with exposure therapy, even I worked with veterans at the Charleston VA years ago, and what we do is talk over and over about the traumatic memories until they stop having their salience as only this trauma memory that your lizard brain responds to automatically, and instead you incorporate it in the narrative of your life. And writing can help with that. Therapy can help with that. A lot of things can help with that. And what you're trying to do as a parent is to teach your child about the world, in addition to having a loving and authentic relationship with them. And if you don't share anything about yourself that isn't positive, you can't really have a loving and authentic relationship with them. And also they start to think of you as this kind of NPC, as the kids say, right? That never had anything bad happen. So then why would they come to you when anything bad happens to them? How would they think that you would understand? They wouldn't. So that's these kind of talks, like, do you ever remember your parent having a real conversation with you where you learned more about them? If not, well, that's why you're struggling now, because you don't have a template. But if so, then you probably remember how meaningful it was to finally realize why your parent acted the way that they did. It's a very meaningful conversation for a lot of people that they have too late. They have it in middle adulthood. Your dad was acting like a dick for your whole childhood. And then finally, you realize that he grew up with an alcoholic dad that beat the shit out of him. And man, you wish you would have known that, when you were 12 years old and he was screaming at you for some minor infraction. It would have really helped to cultivate some awareness that he wasn't at least beating the shit out of you, and he must have thought that was a lot better, and he was a traumatized guy and all of this. And this is a lot of what we do in therapy, is kind of trying to understand also where were the parents coming from. They were fucked up too, and usually worse. And it can really be a window of insight into why things happen the way that they happen to help you make sense of your story. All right, I hope that this was valuable, and I will talk to you all soon. And if you want to have discussions about interesting things, always join the Facebook secret group. Happy to have you. All right, bye-bye.